The piano is a musical instrument played using a keyboard, which is a row of keys that the performer presses down or strikes with the fingers and thumbs of both hands. Invented in about 1700, the piano is widely employed in classical, jazz, traditional and popular music for solo and ensemble performances, accompaniment, and for composing and rehearsal. Although the piano is not portable and is often expensive, its versatility, wide range, ability to play chords, ability to play louder or softer, the large number of musicians trained in playing it, and its ubiquity in performance venues and rehearsal spaces have made it one of the Western world's most familiar musical instruments. An acoustic piano usually has a protective wooden case surrounding the soundboard and metal strings, and a row of 88 black and white keys. The strings are sounded when the keys are pressed or struck, and silenced by a damper when the keys are released. The notes can be sustained even when the keys are released by the use of pedals at the base of the instrument. Unlike two of the major keyboard instruments that preceded the piano, the pipe organ and the harpsichord, the weight or force with which a performer presses or strikes the keys changes the dynamics and tone of the instrument. Pressing one or more keys on the piano's keyboard causes a padded hammer to strike the strings. The hammer rebounds from the strings, and the strings continue to vibrate at the resonant frequency. These vibrations are transmitted through a bridge to a soundboard that amplifies by more efficiently coupling the acoustic energy to the air. When the key is released, a damper stops the strings' vibration, ending the sound. Although an acoustic piano has strings, it is usually classified as a percussion instrument rather than as a stringed instrument, because the strings are struck rather than plucked. In the horn-bosstel-sax system of instrument classification, pianos are considered chordophones. With technological advances, electric pianos, electronic and digital pianos have also been developed. The electric piano became a popular instrument in the 1960s and 1970s genres of jazz, fusion and rock music. The word piano is a shortened form of pianoforte, the Italian term for the instrument, which in turn derives from gravicembalo col piano e forte and forte piano. The Italian musical terms piano and forte indicate soft and loud respectively. In this context, referring to the variations in volume produced in response to a pianist's touch on the keys. The greater the velocity of a key press, the greater the force of the hammer hitting the strings, and the louder the sound of the note produced. History. The piano was founded on earlier technological innovations in keyboard instruments. The first string instruments with struck strings were the hammered dulcimers, which were used since the Middle Ages in Europe. During the Middle Ages, there were several attempts at creating stringed keyboard instruments with struck strings. By the 17th century, the mechanisms of keyboard instruments such as the clavichord and the harpsichord were well developed. In a clavichord, the strings are struck by tangents, while in a harpsichord, they are mechanically plucked by quills when the performer depresses the key. Centuries of work on the mechanism of the harpsichord in particular had shown the most effective ways to construct the case, soundboard, bridge, and mechanical action for a keyboard intended to sound strings. The invention of the piano is credited to Bartolomeo Cristofori of Padua, Italy, who was employed by Ferdinando de' Medici, Grand Prince of Tuscany, as the keeper of the instruments. He was an expert harpsichord maker, and was well acquainted with the body of knowledge on stringed keyboard instruments. It is not known exactly when Cristofori first built a piano. An inventory made by his employers, the Medici family, indicates the existence of a piano by the year 1700. Another document of doubtful authenticity indicates a date of 1698. The three Cristofori pianos that survive today date from the 1720s. Cristofori named the instrument Ensemble di Cipresso di Pianoforte, abbreviated over time as pianoforte, fortepiano, and simply piano, while the clavichord allowed expressive control of volume and sustain. It was too quiet for large performances. The harpsichord produced a sufficiently loud sound, but offered little expressive control over each note. A harpsichord could not produce a variety of dynamic levels from the same keyboard during a musical passage, although a harpsichord with two manuals could be used to alternate between two different stops, which could include a louder stop and a quieter stop. The piano offered the best features of both instruments, combining the ability to play loudly with dynamic control that permitted a range of dynamics, including soft playing. Cristofori's great success was solving, with no prior example, the fundamental mechanical problem of designing a stringed keyboard instrument in which the notes are struck by a hammer. The hammer must strike the string, but not remain in contact with it, because this would damp the sound. Moreover, the hammer must return to its rest position without bouncing violently, and it must return to a position in which it is ready to play almost immediately after its key is depressed, so the player can repeat the same note rapidly. Cristofori's piano action was a model for the many approaches to piano actions that followed. Cristofori's early instruments were made with thin strings, and were much quieter than the modern piano, but much louder and with more sustain in comparison to the clavichord, the only previous keyboard instrument capable of dynamic nuance via the weight or force with which the keyboard is played. Early fortepiano Cristofori's new instrument remained relatively unknown until an Italian writer, Scipione Maffei, wrote an enthusiastic article about it in 1711, including a diagram of the mechanism that was translated into German and widely distributed. Most of the next generation of piano builders started the work based on reading the article. One of these builders was Gottfried Silbermann, better known as an organ builder. Silbermann's pianos were virtually direct copies of Cristofori's, with one important addition. Silbermann invented the forerunner of the modern sustain pedal, which lifts all the dampers from the strings simultaneously. This allows the pianist to sustain the notes that she has depressed even after her fingers are no longer pressing down the keys. This innovation enabled pianists to, for example, play a loud chord with both hands in the lower register of the instrument, sustain the chord with the sustain pedal, and then, with the chord continuing to sound, relocate the hands to a different register of the keyboard in preparation for a subsequent section. Silbermann showed Johann Sebastian Bach one of his early instruments in the 1730s, but Bach did not like it at the time, claiming that the higher notes were too soft to allow a full dynamic range. Although this earned him some animosity from Silbermann, the criticism was apparently heeded. Bach did approve of a later instrument he saw in 1747, and even served as an agent in selling Silbermann's pianos. Instrument: piano forte genant. A reference to the instrument's ability to play soft and loud was an expression that Bach used to help sell the instrument. When he was acting as Silbermann's agent in 1749, piano making flourished during the late 18th century in the Viennese school, which included Johann Andreas Stein and the Viennese makers Nanette Streicher and Anton Walter. Viennese-style pianos were built with wood frames, 2 strings per note, and leather-covered hammers. Some of these Viennese pianos had the opposite coloring of modern-day pianos. The natural keys were black and the accidental keys white. It was for such instruments that Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart composed his concertos and sonatas, and replicas of them are built in the 2000s for use in authentic instrument performance of his music. The pianos of Mozart's day had a softer, more ethereal tone, and 2000-era era pianos or English pianos with less sustaining power. The term fortepiano has in modern times come to be used to distinguish these early instruments from later pianos. Modern piano in the period from about 1790 to 1860. The Mozart-era piano underwent tremendous changes that led to the modern form of the instrument. This revolution was in response to a preference by composers and pianists for a more powerful, sustained piano sound, and made possible by the ongoing industrial revolution with resources such as high-quality piano wire for strings, and precision casting for the production of massive iron frames that could withstand the tremendous tension of the strings. Over time, the tonal range of the piano was also increased from the 5 octaves of Mozart's day to the 7-octave range found on modern pianos. Early technological progress in the late 1700s owed much to the firm of Broadwood. John Broadwood joined with another Scot, Robert Stoddart, and a Dutchman, Americus Bacchus, to design a piano in the harpsichord case, the origin of the grand. They achieved this in about 1777. They quickly gained a reputation for the splendor and powerful tone of their instruments, with Broadwood constructing pianos that were progressively larger, louder, and more robustly constructed. They sent pianos to both Joseph Haydn and Ludwig van Beethoven, and were the first firm to build pianos with a range of more than 5 octaves. 5 octaves and a fifth during the 1790s, 6 octaves by 1810, and 7 octaves by 1820. The Viennese makers similarly followed these trends, however the two schools used different piano actions. Broadwood's used a more robust action, whereas Viennese instruments were more sensitive. By the 1820s, the center of piano innovation had shifted to Paris, where the Plal firm manufactured pianos used by Frédéric Chopin and the Erard firm manufactured those used by Franz Liszt. In 1821, Sebastian Erard invented the double escapement action, which incorporated a repetition lever that permitted repeating a note even if the key had not yet risen to its maximum vertical position. This facilitated rapid playing of repeated notes, a musical device exploited by Liszt. When the invention became public, as revised by Henry Hertz, the double escapement action gradually became standard in grand pianos, and is still incorporated into all grand pianos currently produced in the 2000s. Other improvements of the mechanism included the use of felt ammo coverings instead of layered leather or cotton felt, which was first introduced by Jean-Henri Papeille in 1826, was a more consistent material, permitting wider dynamic ranges as hammer weights and string tension increased. The sostenuto pedal, invented in 1844 by Jean-Louis Bosselot and copied by the Steinway firm in 1874, allowed a wider range of effects. One innovation that helped create the powerful sound of the modern piano was the use of a strong, cast iron frame, also called the plate. The iron frame sits atop the soundboard, and serves as the primary bulwark against the force of string tension that can exceed 20 tons in a modern grand. The single-piece cast iron frame was patented in 1825 in Boston by Alpheus Babcock, combining the metal hitchpin plate and resisting bars. Babcock later worked for the Chickering and Amp Mackay's firm, who patented the first full iron frame for her pianos in 1843. Composite forged metal frames were preferred by many European makers until the American system was fully adopted by the early 20th century. The increased structural integrity of the iron frame allowed the use of thicker, tenser, and more numerous strings. In 1834, the Webster and Amp Horsfall firm of Birmingham brought out a form of piano wire made from cast steel. According to Dolge, it was so superior to the iron wire that the English firm soon had a monopoly, but better steel wire was soon created in 1840 by the Viennese firm of Martin Miller, and a period of innovation and intense competition ensued, with rival brands of piano wire being tested against one another at international competitions, leading ultimately to the modern form of piano wire. Other important advances included changes to the way the piano is strung, such as the use of a choir of 3 strings rather than 2 for all but the lowest notes, and the implementation of an overstrung scale, in which the strings are placed in 2 separate planes, each with its own bridge height. This permitted a much narrower cabinet at the nose end of the piano, and optimized the transition from unwound tenor strings to the iron copper-wrapped bass strings. Overstringing was invented by Pape during the 1820s, and first patented for use in grand pianos in the United States by Henry Steinway, Jr. In 1859, some piano makers developed schemes to enhance the tone of each note. Julius Bluthner developed aliquot stringing in 1893, as well as Pascal Taskin and Collard amp Collard. These systems were used to strengthen the tone of the highest register of notes on the piano, which up till this time were viewed as being too weak sounding. Each used more distinctly ringing, undamped vibrations of sympathetically vibrating strings to add to the tone, except the Bluthner aliquot stringing, which uses an additional 4th string in the upper 2 treble sections, while the hitchpins of these separately suspended aliquot strings are raised slightly above the level of the usual tri-choir strings. They are not struck by the hammers but rather are damped by attachments of the usual dampers. Eager to copy these effects, Theodore Steinway invented duplex scaling, which used short lengths of non-speaking wire bridged by the aliquot throughout much of the range of the piano, always in locations that caused them to vibrate sympathetically in conformity with the respective overtones, typically in doubled octaves and twelfths. The mechanical action structure of the upright piano was invented in London, England in 1826 by Robert Wernham, and upright models became the most popular model. Upright pianos took less space than had piano, and as such they were a better size for use in private homes for domestic music making and practice. Variations in shape and design. Some early pianos had shapes and designs that are no longer in use. The square piano was cross-strung at an extremely acute angle above the hammers, with the keyboard set along the long side. This design is attributed to Gottfried Silbermann, a Christian Ernst Friederici on the continent, and Johannes Zumpe, a Harman virtuoso in England, and it was improved by changes first introduced by Guillaume Lebrecht Petzold in France and Alpheus Babcock in the United States. Square pianos were built in great numbers through the 1840s in Europe and the 1890s in the United States, and saw the most visible change of any type of piano. The iron-framed, overstrung squares manufactured by Steinway and Amp Sons were more than 2.5 times the size of Zump's wood-framed instruments from a century before. Their overwhelming popularity was due to inexpensive construction and price, although the tone and performance were limited by narrow soundboards, simple actions and string spacing that made proper hammer alignment difficult. The tall, vertically strung upright grand was arranged like a grand set on end, with the soundboard and bridges above the keys, and tuning pins below them. The term was later revived by many manufacturers for advertising purposes. Giraffe pianos, pyramid pianos, and lyre pianos were arranged in a somewhat similar fashion, using evocatively shaped cases. The very tall cabinet piano was introduced about 1805 and was built through the 1840s. It had strings arranged vertically on a continuous frame with bridges extended nearly to the floor, behind the keyboard, and very large sticker action. The short cottage upright, a pianino with vertical stringing, made popular by Robert Wenham around 1815, was built into the 20th century. They are informally called birdcage pianos because of the prominent damper mechanism. The oblique upright, popularized in France by Roller and Amp Blanchet during the late 1820s, was diagonally strung throughout its compass. The tiny spinet upright was manufactured from the mid-1930s until recent times. The low position of the hammers required the use of a drop action to preserve a reasonable keyboard height. Modern upright and grand pianos attained the present 2000-era forms by the end of the 19th century. While improvements have been made in manufacturing processes, many individual details of the instrument continue to receive attention. The 19th century was the era of the most dramatic innovations and modifications of the instrument.